It was one of those nights where everything seemed to go wrong. Laura Bennett had been driving for hours hoping to reach her cousin's house before it got too late. But fate had other plans. As she turned onto a narrow, poorly lit road, her old sedan began to sputter. At first she thought it might just be a temporary hiccup, a minor glitch in the engine. But then the car jolted violently, coughed twice, and finally came to a complete stop. Laura gripped the steering wheel tightly, staring ahead into the darkness. There were no streetlights here, only the faint glow of her headlights illuminating the empty stretch of asphalt. She tried turning the key in the ignition again, but all she heard was an ominous clicking sound. Nothing more. No roar of the engine, no purr of life returning to her vehicle. Just silence. She sat there for a moment, letting out a deep sigh. It wasn't supposed to be like this. This trip was meant to be simple, a chance to catch up with family after months of being busy with work. Instead, she now found herself stranded in the middle of nowhere, miles away from civilization. The air outside felt cool against her skin as she stepped out of the car. She pulled her jacket closer around her shoulders, trying to ward off both the chill and the growing unease creeping into her mind. The road stretched endlessly in either direction, flanked by dense woods that seemed almost alive in the shadows. Every rustle of leaves or distant hoot of an owl made her jump a little. Laura glanced back at her car, wondering what to do next. She didn't have cell service here. She'd checked already. And walking along this desolate road in search of help didn't seem like a good idea. Not with how remote the area felt. Still, she couldn't just sit inside the car and wait forever. Something needed to happen, even if it meant taking a risk. Her eyes scanned the horizon, searching for any sign of hope. That's when she noticed it, a faint flicker of light in the distance. Squinting, she realized it was a neon sign, glowing weakly through the trees. Though the words were hard to make out from here, she could tell it belonged to some kind of establishment. Maybe a gas station, or perhaps a diner. Either way, it was her best shot at finding help. Taking a deep breath, Laura locked her car and started walking toward the light. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down not just by exhaustion but also by apprehension. She wasn't naive. She knew places like this could be dangerous. Remote locations often attracted people who preferred to stay off the grid, and not all of them were friendly. Still, staying put wasn't an option either. She had to try. As she drew closer, the flickering sign became clearer. "The Iron Wheel," it read, the letters uneven and buzzing faintly. Beneath the name was a picture of a motorcycle wheel encircled by flames. The design looked weathered, as though it had seen better days. Laura slowed her pace, her heart beginning to race. From the looks of it, this wasn't a cozy roadside diner. It was a biker bar. The thought sent a shiver down her spine. Biker bars weren't exactly known for their hospitality, especially not to strangers like her. Yet, as much as her instincts screamed at her to turn back, logic told her she had no choice. If anyone nearby could help her, it would likely be someone inside that building. Steeling herself, she pushed open the heavy wooden door and stepped inside. The sudden shift from quiet isolation to loud chaos was overwhelming. The room buzzed with energy, filled with the sounds of laughter, clinking glasses, and the low thrum of conversation. Smoke hung thick in the air, swirling lazily under the dim lights. Laura blinked rapidly, trying to adjust to the change in atmosphere. Every pair of eyes in the room turned to look at her. Some faces were curious, others amused, and a few downright suspicious. Most of the patrons were men, dressed in leather jackets adorned with patches and insignias she didn't recognize. Their boots thudded heavily on the floor as they shifted positions, watching her intently. For a moment, Laura froze, unsure of what to say or do. Then, one man stood up. He was tall, with broad shoulders and arms covered in tattoos. His beard was scruffy, and his piercing blue eyes studied her carefully. Despite his intimidating appearance, there was something about him that didn't feel entirely threatening. Slowly, he approached her, stopping just a few feet away. "You lost?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. Laura swallowed hard, forcing herself to speak. "My car broke down." she said quickly, gesturing vaguely toward the road. I saw your sign and thought maybe someone here could help. The man nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. After a pause, he replied, "Stay here. We'll figure it out." He gestured for her to sit at the bar while he walked over to a group of men seated at a nearby table. They exchanged a few words, their voices too low for Laura to hear. Whatever they discussed, it seemed to involve her because, every so often, one of them would glance in her direction. Laura perched awkwardly on a stool, feeling out of place amidst the rough crowd. She kept her hands clasped tightly around her purse, her knuckles white from the tension. Yet despite her nerves, she couldn't help but notice something unexpected. These bikers weren't treating her cruelly. In fact, aside from the initial stares, they seemed more curious than hostile. One of the men behind the bar slid a glass of water toward her without saying a word. Laura offered him a small, grateful smile, which he returned with a nod. It was a tiny gesture, but it helped ease her anxiety ever so slightly. Minutes passed, though they felt like hours. Finally, the man who had spoken to her earlier, his name was Jake, she learned later, returned with two others. One was shorter, with a bandana tied around his shaved head, while the other was younger, with kind eyes and a nervous habit of tapping his fingers on the counter. "We can take a look at your car," Jake said simply. "Might be able to fix it. If not, we'll call a tow truck." Laura blinked in surprise. "Really? You do that?" Jake shrugged. "We look out for folks around here. Doesn't matter who you are." For the first time since her car broke down, Laura allowed herself to feel a flicker of hope. These men might look tough, but their actions spoke louder than their appearances. And in that moment, standing in a dingy biker bar in the middle of nowhere, she realized that sometimes the most unlikely people could offer the greatest kindness. Laura followed the bikers back to her car, feeling equal parts grateful and uneasy. She wasn't used to relying on strangers, let alone ones who looked like they belonged in a movie about outlaw gangs. But there was something genuine in their willingness to help that made her push aside her doubts. For now. When they reached the sedan, Jake immediately took charge. He gestured for Carter, the man with the bandana, to grab a toolbox from one of the motorcycles. Meanwhile, Ethan, the younger biker, pulled out a flashlight and began examining the engine compartment. Laura stood nearby, clutching her purse against her chest, unsure if she should offer assistance or stay out of their way. "Looks like a busted alternator," Jake muttered, after a few minutes of poking around under the hood. His voice was calm, but focused, like he'd dealt with this kind of problem before. "Could take a while to fix," Carter nodded, already rummaging through the tools. "Worth a shot, though. If we can get it running again, she won't have to wait for a tow truck." Ethan glanced up at Laura, offering her a reassuring smile. "Don't worry. We'll do what we can." Laura managed a weak smile in return, though her mind was racing. These men were going out of their way to help her, despite having no obligation to do so. It didn't make sense, not based on the stereotypes she'd always heard about bikers, but here they were, proving her wrong. As the trio worked, Laura found herself observing them more closely. Despite their tough exteriors, there was a surprising level of camaraderie between them. They joked and teased each other as they tinkered with the engine, their banter lightening the mood. Even Jake, who seemed like the most serious of the group, cracked a grin when Carter accidentally dropped a wrench. "You're lucky I don't charge you for this," Carter said with a smirk, picking up the tool and pretending to examine it critically. Yeah, Jake replied, rolling his eyes. "Just focus on not breaking anything else." Ethan laughed softly, shaking his head. "We're supposed to be helping her, not giving her a comedy show." Laura couldn't help but chuckle at that. Their easygoing dynamic was contagious, and for the first time since her car broke down, she started to relax. Maybe being stranded wasn't going to be as bad as she'd feared. After nearly an hour of troubleshooting, however, it became clear that fixing the alternator wasn't going to be as simple as they'd hoped. Jake wiped his hands on a rag and sighed heavily. "It's beyond us," he admitted reluctantly. "We'll need to call a tow truck." Laura felt a pang of disappointment but quickly pushed it aside. "Thank you for trying," she said sincerely. "I really appreciate it." Jake waved off her gratitude. "No big deal. Happens all the time out here." He turned to Ethan. Go inside and use the landline. See if you can get someone out here tonight. Ethan nodded and jogged back toward the bar, leaving Laura alone with Jake and Carter. For a moment, an awkward silence settled between them. Laura shifted uncomfortably, unsure of what to say. She wasn't used to situations like this, being surrounded by people who lived such different lives from her own. Finally, Carter broke the silence. So, where were you headed? He asked casually, leaning against the side of the car. Cousin's house, Laura replied. She lives about 20 miles from here. I was supposed to meet her for dinner. Family stuff, Carter said with a knowing nod. Always worth the drive even if your car doesn't agree. Laura smiled faintly. Yeah, well, maybe next time I'll check the engine before leaving town. Jake chuckled softly. Good idea. Though if you ever need a mechanic recommendation, let me know. I've got a buddy who owes me a favor. His words caught Laura off guard. She hadn't expected him to offer further assistance, especially considering how much they'd already done for her. Thanks, she said quietly. I'll keep that in mind. Before long, Ethan returned with news. They can send someone out tomorrow morning, he reported. Apparently, no one's available tonight, but they'll prioritize it first thing. Laura nodded, trying to hide her frustration. Spending the night stranded in this area wasn't ideal, but she didn't see any other options. Okay, she said finally. What should I do until then? Jake exchanged a glance with Carter before answering. You're welcome to stay at the bar. It's safe enough and we'll keep an eye on you. The offer surprised her. Are you sure? I don't want to impose. It's fine, Jake insisted. Besides, it's not like you've got anywhere else to go. Reluctantly, Laura agreed. The thought of sleeping in her car wasn't appealing, especially not in such a remote location, and despite her initial reservations, she trusted these men. Or at least she trusted that they meant her no harm. Back inside the Iron Wheel, the atmosphere had shifted slightly. Some of the patrons had left, leaving the room quieter than before. Laura noticed a few curious glances directed her way, but no one approached her. Instead, she was given space to sit at the bar where Carter poured her a cup of coffee. Here, he said, sliding the mug toward her. Might help you stay awake. Thanks, Laura murmured, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. The caffeine wasn't necessary. Her nerves kept her wide awake, but the gesture was comforting nonetheless. For the next hour or so, Laura listened as the bikers talked among themselves. Their conversations ranged from mundane topics like upcoming rides to more personal stories about their lives. She learned that Jake had been riding motorcycles since he was a teenager, while Carter had once worked as a mechanic before joining the group. Ethan, the youngest of the trio, admitted he was still figuring things out, both in life and on the road. Their openness intrigued Laura. She'd always assumed bikers were closed-off, secretive individuals, yet here they were, sharing pieces of themselves without hesitation. It made her wonder how many misconceptions she'd held about people simply because of appearances. Eventually, the topic shifted to her. Jake leaned against the bar, his arms crossed over his chest. So what do you do when you're not getting stranded in the middle of nowhere? He asked with a teasing smirk. Laura laughed softly. I'm a graphic designer. Nothing exciting compared to, well, whatever it is you guys do. Hey, everyone's got their thing, Carter interjected. At least you don't have to deal with busted engines every day. True, Laura conceded. Though I wouldn't mind learning a bit more about cars after tonight. The conversation continued late into the night, the tension easing with each passing minute. By the time Laura finally drifted off to sleep in a corner booth, wrapped in a spare blanket provided by Ethan, she realized something important. Sometimes the people you least expect to rely on are the ones who end up saving you. Just as Laura began to feel safe inside the Iron Wheel, the peace was shattered by the sound of an approaching vehicle. The rumble of a powerful engine broke through the quiet hum of conversation, growing louder until it stopped abruptly outside the bar. Everyone turned toward the entrance, their faces tense and alert. Through the open doorway, Laura could see 3 men stepping out of a black pickup truck. They were dressed casually but carried themselves with an air of menace that made her stomach churn. One of them, a wiry man with a jagged scar running across his cheek, led the group. His cold eyes scanned the area before landing on Laura. A cruel smirk twisted his lips. "Well, well," he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery. "Looks like we've got ourselves a stray." Laura's heart raced as she instinctively stepped back, her body stiffening with fear. She didn't know these men, but she could tell they weren't here for friendly reasons. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to go. Instead, she found herself moving closer to the bikers, seeking their protection without even realizing it. Jake immediately stepped forward, placing himself between Laura and the newcomers. His broad frame blocked their view of her, and his expression hardened into something unreadable yet undeniably dangerous. "She's with us," he said firmly, his tone leaving no room for argument. The scarred man raised an eyebrow, pretending to consider Jake's words. "With you, huh? Funny she doesn't look like one of your kind." Carter moved to stand beside Jake, his stance defensive. "What's it to you?" he snapped, his voice sharp and unyielding. "This ain't your territory." The tension in the room escalated rapidly. Ethan lingered near Laura, his hand resting lightly on her shoulder as if to reassure her. Though his touch was gentle, his gaze remained fixed on the intruders, his jaw clenched tightly. Scarface chuckled darkly, exchanging amused glances with his companions. "Relax, boys. We're just passing through." He took a step forward, ignoring the warning glare from Jake. "But I gotta say, it's not every day you find someone like her wandering around here. Thought maybe she needed assistance." His choice of words sent a chill down Laura's spine. She knew exactly what he meant, or rather, what he implied. These men weren't interested in helping her. They saw her as vulnerable, an easy target, for whatever twisted plans they had in mind. Jake's response was immediate and cutting. "I said she's with us. That means hands off." For a moment, Scarface hesitated, clearly weighing his options. But then his smirk returned, wider and more sinister than before. "Big talk for a bunch of bikers hiding behind their bikes. You sure you want to start something?" The threat hung heavy in the air, but Jake didn't flinch. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, his piercing blue eyes narrowing. "You really want to test that?" Behind him, the other bikers began to gather, forming a protective wall around Laura. Some cracked their knuckles or adjusted their stances, preparing for a fight. Even those who hadn't been directly involved earlier now joined the fray, united in their determination to defend her. Scarface glanced at his companions, gauging their readiness. For all his bravado, he wasn't stupid enough to pick a fight with this many opponents, especially when they were so clearly outnumbered. After a long, tense silence, he let out a low laugh and shook his head. "Fine," he muttered, raising his hands in mock surrender. "We'll leave your little stray alone for now." He shot one last venomous look at Laura before turning back toward the truck. "But don't think this is over." As the pickup roared to life and sped off into the night, the tension slowly eased. Laura exhaled sharply, her legs trembling beneath her. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath the entire time. Without thinking, she leaned against Ethan, who steadied her with a reassuring pat on the back. "You okay?" he asked softly, his voice filled with concern. Laura nodded, though her mind was still reeling. Yeah, I think so." Jake turned to face her, his expression softening slightly. "They won't come back tonight," he assured her. "Not after seeing how many of us are willing to stand up for you." Laura looked around at the bikers, her heart swelling with gratitude. These men barely knew her, yet they had put themselves in harm's way to protect her. It was a level of loyalty and courage she hadn't expected, especially from strangers. "Why did you do that?" she asked finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "You didn't have to risk yourselves for me," Jake shrugged as if it were no big deal. "Like I said before, we look out for people around here. Doesn't matter who you are or where you come from, if someone needs help, we step in," Carter chimed in, crossing his arms over his chest. "Besides, jerks like those guys give everyone else a bad name. Can't let them think they can walk all over anyone they meet." Ethan nodded in agreement. "And you're our guest now. That means you're family, at least until you leave." Their words struck a chord deep within Laura. Family, that's what they reminded her of despite their rough exteriors and unconventional lifestyle. They might not share blood, but they shared something just as important, a bond built on trust, respect, and mutual support. As the adrenaline faded, exhaustion began to creep in. Laura sank onto a nearby bench, her body feeling heavier than ever. The events of the night had taken their toll, both physically and emotionally. Yet, even in her tired state, she couldn't stop replaying everything that had happened. The kindness of the bikers, the danger posed by the outsiders, and the overwhelming sense of relief when it was all over. Jake noticed her fatigue and gestured toward the corner booth where she'd slept earlier. "Get some rest," he advised gently. "Tomorrow will be a long day and you'll need your strength." Laura hesitated, unsure if she should accept his offer, but the sincerity in his voice reassured her. "Thank you," she murmured, her eyes filling with tears. "For everything." Jake waved off her thanks, though a small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Don't mention it. Just promise us you won't go driving through sketchy areas alone anymore." She managed, a weak laugh nodding in agreement. "Deal." As she curled up on the bench, wrapped in the same blanket Ethan had given her earlier, Laura felt a strange sense of peace. Despite the chaos of the night, she knew she was safe here, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about her well-being. And as sleep finally claimed her, she realized something profound. Sometimes the most unexpected places and the most unlikely people can become your sanctuary. The first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was early morning, and the world felt peaceful after the chaos of the previous night. Laura stirred awake in the corner booth of the Iron Wheel, blinking against the dim light filtering through the windows. For a moment she forgot where she was, but then the memories came flooding back. Her car breaking down, meeting the bikers, the dangerous encounter with the men from the pickup truck, and finally, the overwhelming sense of safety she'd found among strangers who had become unexpected allies. She sat up slowly, stretching her stiff muscles. The bar was quieter now, most of the patrons having left hours ago. Only a few remained, scattered around the room, nursing cups of coffee or chatting softly. Jake, Carter, and Ethan were seated at a nearby table, their heads bent together as they discussed something in low voices. When Jake noticed Laura stirring, he gave her a small nod, signaling that it was time to get moving. "The tow truck's here," he said simply, standing up and grabbing his jacket. "Let's go." Laura followed him outside, her heart lifting at the sight of the tow truck waiting by her car. The driver, a middle-aged man with a friendly smile, greeted her warmly. "Morning, ma'am. You must be the one stranded out here?" "Yes, thank you so much for coming," Laura replied, relief washing over her. She turned to look at Jake and the others who stood a few feet away, watching silently. "I don't know what I would have done without these guys." The driver chuckled, glancing at the bikers with a knowing smile. "Looks like you had some good company last night. These fellas take care of their own, huh?" Laura nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. "They sure do." While the driver assessed the damage to her car, Laura walked over to Jake, Carter, and Ethan. They looked tired but alert, their faces illuminated by the rising sun. She hesitated for a moment, unsure how to express her gratitude properly. I don't even know what to say," she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "You saved me, not just once, but twice. If it weren't for you, I don't know what would have happened." Jake shrugged, his expression calm but kind. "Like I told you before, don't worry about it. We're just glad we could help, but why?" Laura pressed, her eyes searching theirs. "You didn't owe me anything, you didn't have to risk yourselves for me. So why did you?" Ethan stepped forward, his younger face breaking into a shy smile. "Because it's the right thing to do. Out here we stick together. Doesn't matter if you're one of us or not, we look out for each other." Carter nodded in agreement, crossing his arms over his chest. "And besides, you're tougher than you look. Most people would have panicked, but you kept your head. That counts for something." Laura felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. Their words touched her deeply, reminding her of the goodness that existed even in places and people she might have misunderstood. She reached out impulsively, hugging each of them in turn. Jake seemed taken aback by the gesture, but he softened quickly, patting her awkwardly on the back. "Take care of yourself, okay?" he said gruffly, stepping back. "Don't make a habit of getting stranded in places like this." "I'll try not to," Laura promised, laughing softly despite the tears streaming down her face. "And if I ever need help again, I know where to find you." The tow truck driver finished hooking up her car and gave her a thumbs up. "All set, ma'am. I'll take it to the shop and have someone call you when it's ready." Laura thanked him again, then turned back to the bikers one last time. "I'll never forget this," she said earnestly. "Any of you. Thank you. For everything." Jake tipped an imaginary hat, his lips curving into a rare smile. "Safe travels, Laura. Hope you make it to your cousin's place without any more trouble." With that, Laura climbed into the passenger seat of the tow truck, waving goodbye as it pulled away. As the vehicle disappeared down the road, Jake, Carter, and Ethan lingered for a moment, watching until it was out of sight. "She's gonna be okay," Ethan said, finally breaking the silence. Jake nodded, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. "Yeah, she's stronger than she thinks." Back inside the iron wheel, the atmosphere shifted back to its usual rhythm. The bikers returned to their routines, settling into conversations and laughter as though nothing unusual had happened. But for Laura, the experience would stay with her forever, a reminder that kindness could come from the most unexpected places, and that sometimes the people who seemed toughest on the outside had the biggest hearts within. As the tow truck carried her closer to civilization, Laura replayed every moment in her mind. From the initial breakdown to the confrontation with the menacing men, and finally to the warmth and protection offered by the bikers, it had been a night full of lessons she wouldn't soon forget. By the time the truck arrived at the repair shop, she felt lighter, as though a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. When she called her cousin later that day to explain the delay, she couldn't stop talking about the bikers. "They were amazing," she gushed, her voice filled with admiration. "I thought I was done for, but they treated me like family. Like I mattered." Her cousin listened patiently, chuckling at Laura's enthusiasm. "Sounds like you made some real friends out there." Laura smiled, staring out the window at the bustling streets. Friends wasn't quite the word for it. It was more than that. These men had shown her that humanity wasn't defined by appearances or stereotypes. It was about actions, about choosing to do the right thing even when it was hard. That evening, as she finally reached her cousin's house and settled into the cozy living room, Laura realized something profound. Life had a way of surprising you. Just when you thought you were alone, it brought people into your path who reminded you of the best parts of humanity. And for that, she would always be grateful. A week had passed since Laura's unexpected adventure, but it felt like a lifetime ago. She'd spent the days catching up with her cousin, enjoying home-cooked meals and laughter-filled conversations. Yet no matter how much she tried to focus on the present, her thoughts kept drifting back to the bikers who had helped her that fateful night. Their kindness lingered in her mind, a constant reminder of the goodness she'd witnessed in an unlikely place. When the mechanic finally called to say her car was ready, Laura didn't hesitate. She drove straight to the repair shop, picked up her sedan, and made a decision. She would go back to the iron wheel. She owed them more than just a thank you. She wanted them to know how much their actions had meant to her. The journey back to the bar felt different this time. The road, once daunting and lonely, now seemed familiar and almost comforting. As she pulled into the gravel parking lot, she spotted the same group of motorcycles lined up outside. Her heart skipped a beat when she saw Jake, Carter, and Ethan standing near the entrance, deep in conversation. They noticed her immediately. Jake raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised to see her again. "Didn't think we'd be seeing you so soon," he said, his tone teasing but warm. Laura stepped out of her car, clutching a small gift bag in her hands. "I couldn't leave without saying goodbye properly," she replied, her voice trembling slightly with emotion. "And without giving you this." She handed the bag to Jake, who opened it cautiously. Inside were 3 keychains, each one engraved with a simple message: "Thank you." It wasn't much, but it was all she could think of to express her gratitude. Jake smirked, shaking his head. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to, Laura insisted, her eyes shining with tears. You guys, you saved me. Not just my car, but me. I don't know what those men would have done if you hadn't been there. Ethan stepped forward, his expression softening. We just did what anyone should have done. You didn't deserve what they were planning. Carter nodded in agreement, crossing his arms over his chest. Besides, you're tough. You handled yourself well even when things got scary. That says a lot about you. Laura wiped at her eyes, laughing softly through her tears. I don't feel tough. I feel lucky to have met people like you. For a moment, none of them spoke. The weight of her words hung in the air, filling the silence with something unspoken yet deeply understood. These men weren't used to being thanked, let alone praised. They lived their lives on the fringes, often judged by their appearances, rather than their actions. But Laura's sincerity broke through that barrier, reminding them of the impact they'd had on her life. Jake cleared his throat, breaking the spell. Well, if you're sticking around, you might as well come inside. We've got coffee and better company than last time. Laura hesitated, glancing toward the bar. She'd already imposed on them enough, or so she thought. But the warmth in Jake's voice reassured her. Are you sure? I don't want to intrude. You're not intruding, Ethan interjected quickly. You're family now, remember? Her heart swelled at his words. Family. It was a term she hadn't expected to associate with these men, yet it fit perfectly. Despite their differences, they had formed a bond that transcended bloodlines, a connection forged through shared experiences and mutual respect. Inside the Iron Wheel, the atmosphere was lively but welcoming. A few patrons waved at Laura as she entered, recognizing her from the previous week. She took a seat at the bar where Carter poured her a cup of coffee and slid it across the counter. On the house, he said with a wink. As the hours passed, Laura found herself immersed in conversations with the bikers. They told her stories about their adventures on the road, their misadventures with broken-down bikes, and the camaraderie that came with living life on their own terms. In return, she shared bits of her own life. Her work as a graphic designer, her love for art, and the challenges of balancing a busy career with personal relationships. Through it all, she realized something profound. These men weren't so different from her. Beneath their rugged exteriors lay dreams, fears, and hopes, just like anyone else. They valued loyalty, cherished freedom, and sought meaning in their lives, even if their paths looked nothing like hers. By the time evening fell, Laura knew it was time to leave. She stood up reluctantly, gathering her belongings. I can't thank you enough, she said, looking at each of them in turn. For everything. I'll never forget this. Jake extended his hand, which she shook firmly. Take care of yourself, Laura, and don't be a stranger. I won't, she promised, hugging Carter and Ethan before heading toward the door. As she stepped outside, she turned back one last time, taking in the sight of the bar and the men who had changed her perspective forever. Driving away, Laura felt lighter somehow, as though a burden she hadn't realized she'd been carrying had been lifted. The experience had taught her invaluable lessons, that kindness exists in unexpected places, that appearances can be deceiving, and that sometimes the most unlikely people become your greatest allies. When she reached her cousin's house later that night, she couldn't stop smiling. Her cousin noticed immediately, raising an eyebrow in curiosity. What's got you in such a good mood? Laura laughed, sinking into a chair. Just remembering something important. Something I'll carry with me for the rest of my life. And she knew it was true. The memory of Jake, Carter, and Ethan, their courage, their generosity, their humanity, would stay with her always. In a world that often felt cold and indifferent, they had reminded her of the power of compassion and the beauty of human connection. As she drifted off to sleep that night, Laura realized she wasn't afraid anymore. Not of dark roads, unfamiliar places, or strangers. because she now understood that even in the darkest moments there were people willing to shine a light, and that knowledge gave her strength, hope, and endless gratitude.